I'm Hindol Sengupta, and I am absolutely delighted to restart a whole new season, as it were, of a show called Being Hindu. I did a first season of this a bunch of years ago when my book Being Hindu came out, and I've been looking for an opportunity to discuss with a whole new range of thinkers, philosophers, writers, what they think about, the politics of Hinduism, Hindutva, and other allied subjects. And the opportunity has come because, I wrote a new book on the history of political Hinduism. And in the course of restarting this show, I wanted to talk to a scholar that I've been wanting to talk to for a long time. Aravind Neelakandan has written one of the most voluminous works on Hindutva, on its origins, on its history. And I want to talk to Aravindan today on what is Hindutva's worldview. It's a particularly interesting time that he and I are going to be talking in, because at this moment, even as we begin to have our conversation, there is a huge uproar about Canada's allegations on India, about the killing of a terrorist, a Khalistani terrorist called Hardeep Singh Nijjar, and a lot of people, especially in the liberal fraternity in the West, thinks of all of this as India's hardline foreign policy. How far is that true? How does it all add up to Hindutva? All this I want to discuss with one of the most erudite scholars writing, working, researching on Hindutva in India today. Arvindan, thanks very much for joining me to have this conversation.
Thank you very much, Hindol Sengupta. It's really a pleasure being with you, having this conversation. So you can start.
You're joining me from Kanyakumari.
Right.
You live there. Kanyakumari is renowned around the world, not just as the southernmost tip of India, but also as a place where Swami Vivekananda spent a lot of time. And of course, there's Vivekananda Rock there. You have to go across the ocean, so to speak, and you reach Vivekananda Rock, and so on and so forth. You have a particularly interesting vantage point, Arvind, I always feel, of looking at Hindutva and its history. Why don't you begin, if I may request you, to talk to us about what you think is the worldview of Hindutva?
Hindutva may be a very recent coinage, 1923 or before that, Rabindranath Tagore. But what I call the process of Hindutva is something very, very old. And it is a sustained process and it has been continuous. And for a process like that to live across millennia, it has to have a vitality of its own. The worldview that we talk about arises from this vitality of Hindutva. What defines Hindutva? The core of Hindutva. The core of Hindutva, I would call, is preservation and nurturing of theodiversity. The term theodiversity was coined by Professor Lokesh Chandra, a scholar of Buddhist studies. And when you look into the history of India, right from the times of Harappan period till now, what is that connects us all is this instinct to preserve theodiversity. This is the essential contribution of Indian culture to the world. And it is always threatened by expansionist monocultures, monopolistic worldviews, which want to destroy the theodiversity. And this preservation, nurturing, and giving this theodiversity framework to the world, to all the civilizations, that is the purpose of India's existence, so as to say. And this is the worldview from which a Hindutvaite spontaneously, whether he calls him Hindutvaite or not, spontaneously operates. And right now, the things that are unfolding, it is a resurgent India asserting itself on the basis of this theodiversity. It no more has to be on its back foot in an ideological way, thinking that what we have to offer is subservient to or inferior to the Western worldviews. So theodiversity is not important. Marxist worldview is important. Socialism is important. Theodiversity is not important. Capitalism and profit-oriented market economy, proving ourselves in that market economy is important. Now, we have come to that point where we can say theodiversity is important. It is going to define the human survival in the coming millennium. So this forms the basis of the worldview actually for us.
Let's dig a little deeper into the term theodiversity, if I may. In my understanding, Lokesh Chandra's coinage of theodiversity essentially talks about the maintenance, preservation, and furtherance of multiple unique cultures and religions, because the word theo is there, and religions and faiths, in a form that they are not consistently threatened by what you just described as expansionist monocultures, and their indigenous integral identity therefore wiped out. Now, this is very important, not just in an Indian context, but this is important across the world, as native cultures have seen, these monocultures wipe out much of this theodiversity. Isn't that correct?
That is absolutely right. But see, when Professor Lokesh Chandra talked about theodiversity, he also talked it positing it along with biodiversity. So as we know, biodiversity is always threatened. There is always what you can call a threat for biodiversity, whether there is whether there is this industrial expansion or anything. This threat would be there. In the same way, in theodiversity also, in a theodiversity ecosystem like India, there is always this threat. For example, and even a native spiritual tradition may try to project itself as the tradition of the entire nation, right? But there have always been checks and balances within the cultural system, this theodiversity system of India, to make sure that those kind of expansion does not happen, right? So that is one aspect. The second aspect is that India also understood a basic fundamental law of theodiversity, which is unity in diversity. This unity in diversity is not just a national culture. I would say that this is a discovery that is of such paramount importance as the discovery of natural selection by Darwin. This defines life. Unity in diversity defines life. And this law, which defines life, or this particular process or condition that defines life, has become the national defining character of India. And hence it makes it universal without being expansionist. So you have to have a culture that is universal, that can validate each and every cultural diversity in each and every nook and corner of this planet. For example, you take Canada. In Canada, there are Native American cultural traditions. If there is one nation state that has the dharmic right to talk about the preservation of those native Canadian cultural, spiritual traditions, it is India. So in this way, this particular aspect, the preservation of theodiversity, as I again and again I would emphasize this is not just a characteristic, this is a process strand that has been going through this nation's civilizational life. And now we are in a position to gift it to the planet in a very different way. For example, when the British wanted to gift whatever they had for the world, they took the form of colonialism, created famines, destroyed lives, destroyed communities. When India wants to gift this theodiversity to the planet, it is going to take a very different approach. And that is what we are seeing right now unfolding.
What you're explaining, Aravindan, it's very interesting, because this is the reverse of what many people in the West, in fact, many people in the East also understand or believe they understand about Hindutva. Because in usual parlance, It's always considered that, oh, well, Hindutva wants to create a space for itself and not make room for other people. You are arguing exactly the reverse. You are saying at its very heart, Hindutva as an ideology wishes to preserve diversity, theodiversity. May many cultures, may many religions prosper and thrive without attempting to eliminate one another, without attempting to, destroy one another. Isn't that correct?
That is right. Only a small modification that Hindutva is not an ideology. It is a process, a millennial civilizational process that is very overt in India, but at the same time, it is universal. I would say that Hindutva is universal because when in 2009, I think, when Newsweek, you would be knowing that particular thing, when Newsweek found out that most of the Americans think that anybody who is a good person can attain salvation or liberation, then what was the title they gave? We are all Hindus now. So this universal acceptance. See, for example, there is a tribal culture somewhere. They haven't heard about Vedas. They don't know a single word in Sanskrit. Most probably their language family is not Indo-European family. It is not Dravidian family. It is something entirely different. But how Hindutva operates is that it tells by our existence, we validate your divinity. So your culture, your rituals, they have their own inherent divinity. We validate it. We don't impose our way of life on you. That is Hindutva. When you give that validity of their spiritual tradition, then any native group, any indigenous group will become emboldened, will become emancipated. So that is what Hindutva actually is.
The most fascinating things about your argument, and this is something I argue in the latter part of my book also, what you just described, in many of its traits and fundamental ideas, in a sense, is classic liberalism. The liberal idea came from this idea that you validate the existence of everybody, you ensure that multiple cultures are preserved, you ensure that multiple ideas from those cultures have their own unique space. Now, obviously, this didn't happen in many countries, especially in the West, where entire cultures were wiped out. In America, for instance, the Native Americans were completely wiped out. In Canada, one of their most recent controversies is about Native Americans are being wiped out. Of course, perhaps not at the scale of America, but at a smaller scale, but still in the same manner in Canada and many other parts of the world. Today, many of these countries in the global north, so to speak, claim that they are preserving unique cultures and allowing them to thrive in their democratic processes in exactly the same manner that you described. That the existence of this framework, which is quote unquote liberal democracy. Now, how far that is true, what are the aberrations, we can discuss that. But at least that's the claim, that as a framework, it allows this validation. You are essentially saying that long before this framework came into being, long before this framework came into being, Hindutva as an idea, because of the diversity that it contains within itself, allows for the argument for similar diversity to thrive around the world and validate similar diversity around the world. Allows it to really thrive and have a place in the world.
There is one vital difference. It is that the Western classical liberalism always comes into play only after the spiritual kernel, the spiritual core of a civilization has been destroyed. After the spiritual core has been destroyed, after all your Latin American scholars, after all your African scholars who talk about post-colonialism all have Christian names, then they will talk about this particular classical liberalism. So the core has been destroyed. The core is European. The outer forms, they will allow a package of this classical liberalism. I will give you a solid example for this. Whenever we talk about civil rights, It's, of course, a very inspiring example. We naturally talk about Martin Luther King. And it's a very great, he definitely was a great inspiring example for all of us. But he has now become the face of American culture also, right? Look deep into the American culture. Even as Martin Luther King was fighting for his people, the deep state of United States was conducting Tuskegee experiments, the longest experiments done on the black people, seeing the effect of syphilis on male black population. Longest experiment, starting from, I think, 1932 to 1972 onward. It was going on. How many people were punished for it? How many people were called to justice? Was there a movement to punish these people? You can easily brush aside all that with this posturing of classical liberals. How many movies were there? Suppose something like this had happened in India. In India, such a thing can never happen. You cannot take a particular scheduled tribe and do this kind of things, because the social structure of India is created by this vast network of communities, and reservation. For all the negative characterization of reservation is also a reflection of Hindutva, because it is the continuation of representational government that was present in Panchayat, that was present in the king's courts in ancient times. In the king's court, among the courtiers, there would be person from every community. So all the interests would be present. The same thing continues today in the form of reservation. Only thing is they have added a victimhood narrative to it. But otherwise, it is the representation. So with this kind of representation, a Tuskegee experiment-like thing can never happen in India. That is the difference between the classical liberalism and Hindutva.
Really glad you made this distinction, because that allows me to segue into the next part, which I want to talk to you about. This is exactly the point, isn't it? Hindutva's liberalism, you have to consider what are the origins of that liberal feeling, so to speak. Classical liberalism derives its origins from a elimination of what Enlightenment thought of as backward spiritual processes, movements. And in a sense, they had a reason, isn't it, Arvind? Because, at that time, the church was in every aspect of life. And they had seen, a particular corruption between church and state, which brought about the Enlightenment. And therefore, the Enlightenment origins of classical liberalism means that you have to deny spiritualism completely, or any format of spiritualism. The difference is Hindutva doesn't derive its quote-unquote liberal ideals from this denial at all. In fact, or quite on the contrary, it says that the highest form of virtue, in a sense, of liberal virtue, is derived from spirituality, because only a sense of spirituality can help you really eliminate the deep-seated prejudices and biases that all of us have and carry as human beings. Now, this can only be eliminated through a process of spiritual cleansing. Now, this, of course, is entirely denied by quote unquote classical liberalism, and that's the big difference. Do you see these these ideals, in a sense, colliding more today, or or increasingly being able to understand each other a little bit and coming to some sort of middle path?
Here, we have to do a very, very surgical historical dissection of the Enlightenment process of the West. So if you take the Enlightenment process, there are two strands there, actually. One strand is the actual Enlightenment process, for which you can trace it backwards. If you trace its origin, it would be in the pagan philosophies, it would be in the Hermetic philosophies, it would be in the mystic non-dual visions of the seeds, for example, like Spinoza. But the Protestant Reformation movement was, in a way, a reaction to this Enlightenment movement. It was like the Wahhabi movement. In fact, Wahhabi movement is a Protestant movement because actually it said, let us go back to the Bible. And they were against the corruption of the church, of course, but they were not for any radical reformation of the entire society. They couldn't, because Martin Luther himself participated in the massacre of peasants. And when he was defining peasants, he told that these people by nature are very bad. They have to be massacred. What is the equivalent term of peasants in India? Shudras. Can any of our saints uttered these words that Sudras should be massacred because by nature they are bad? They have never said that. Very rarely you can find a single line telling, okay, you should beat a Shudra, something like that. One line. But massacring the Shudras entirely. That was said by Martin Luther. But it never comes into the actual mainstream history of Europe, the West. So what happened was, when colonialism happened, a package of Protestant religion and enlightenment was made, and it was marketed to the colonized countries through education. Actual enlightenment process, if you look at it, and if you look at the way it evolved, for example, in Aldous Huxley was talking about the perennial philosophy, which is actually Sanatana Dharma. If you look at the entire series, if you look at it carefully, each and every person would have one way or other felt a kind of same wavelength with some aspect of Hindu culture at that time. So we have to make, again, Hindutva has to do this particular thing. We have to make sure that a real global history is written in which we identify. I have gone through textbooks of history in the West, and seldom they talk about Spinoza, seldom they talk about Wordsworth. They don't talk about Van Gogh. Their history is only about the political power. If you take the way Hindutva history is written, you will find that always our history is about the saints who came from every section of the society. Potters, people who do hygiene work, housewives, people who grind flour, and people who work in the paddy field, peasants. Everybody has been told. See, if you go and ask an ordinary Indian, he wouldn't be knowing about, let us say, Shah Jahan or Jahangir, or he would not even be knowing about Samudragupta and Chandragupta, but he would be knowing about Korakumbha. He would be knowing about Namadev, he would be knowing about Jnaneshwar, and all these people were mendicants. They were not emperors. So this is the kind of history that we created. This is the kind of narrative that we created. This narrative we have to globalize. And we have to rewrite the entire global history in terms of this seeking of truth that happened in their history. So a Hindutva history would include in it Spinoza. A Hindutva history would include in it Van Gogh. It would not care about Hitler. It would not care about Churchill. So that is the aspect of Hindutva that we have to take globally, actually.
To come to a couple of very interesting points you made, but let me ask you, let me play devil's advocate, Aravindan, if you would allow me. Some may hear this conversation that we're having and say, well, actually, what you're trying to do is you are trying to, in a sense, incorporate all the many of the stuff that happened in the West, and you're trying to force feed it to say, well, actually, we are the origin story of all of this. But you really don't have anything to do with it. All of this happened independently in the West. Now, it is true that it's slightly harder to prove this with some people who, were reading in Hindu religious texts, were reading the Upanishads and so on and so forth. But for others, they would say, well, this is our stuff. Why are you trying to incorporate all of this into your understanding of the world? Because you don't have anything to do with this geographically or ideologically.
That is exactly my point. You see, they came there independently. For example, I will again go to Spinoza. He is my most favorite philosopher. So, a lens grinder living in Amsterdam gets the same vision as that of Adi Shankara. He hasn't heard a single word of Sanskrit in all his life. And his philosophy that later influenced the entire Western higher life, it was non-dualist. So what I say is, this is the validation part I am talking about. If it has originated from India, let us say, if it has originated from India, then my entire argument fails. It has somehow gone from here to the West. That means it is just a natural process, a diffusion. But if it comes there spontaneously, then I would say that it has to be preserved. I validate that independent expression. That is Hindutva. That is why I say, when we write the world history, that world history will be different. We won't be claiming that everything came from India. Rather, we would be saying that these all are the dimensions that should be highlighted, not just the political power, economic dimensions of history alone. That is the point.
So glad you said this, because this is entirely the point, isn't it? This ought to differentiate us, because in world history, every country wants to show itself as the source of things. And so does India to a degree, and rightfully so for certain things. But in the larger framework, this idea that people came to the truth via their own processes, whatever the process may have been, the truth that they came to be understood across geographies by people who had nothing in common with them, but also came to the same truth, using their own methodology, not the same, using their own methodologies and formats. That is the fundamental argument of Hindutva. Would you say that?
That is the fundamental argument of Hindutva. That is the essence of Hindutva, I would say that, because there is a particular aspect in all these academic discussions of Hindutva that I have been seeing, is that they omit a lot of very important, crucial passages. For example, I'm answering the question that you asked just now. Veer Savarkar says this in 1923. How he concludes Essentials of Hindutva? He concludes like this: a Hindu, in the height of his Hinduness, the height of Hindutva, ceases to be a Hindu. He can embrace the entire universe as his own homeland. So that is the nature of Hindutva. And I find this again and again and again. I find this in the writings of Sri Aurobindo. I find this in the writings of Bankim Chandra Chatterjee. So I find this in the writings of Lala Hardayal. All these people, see, they were a colonized nation at that time. They had all the right to be angry with British. They could have characterized British as a kind of demonic people and we as a kind of superior people. They didn't do that. They didn't do that. They fought against the British with bitter battles. They fought against the British. At the same time, they acknowledged the divinity within them also. That is the greatness of the Hindutva.
I want to now move a little bit, Arvind, to another point, which I think is really interesting, which is the engagement and the process of explaining this, to people. Because a lot of people, especially in the West and even in India, think of these things as right and left terms, right? This is right wing, that is left wing. Whereas, in your reading and certainly my reading too, a lot of the textual matter of Hindutva or Hindu politics talks about a very different approach. Even in economics, as many of us have pointed out, Hindi and others talk about the third way, so to speak, between capitalism and communism. Even in the worldview, it cannot really be divided in this left-right easy division, isn't it?
Right. It is very tough to divide these things into left and right. If you take most of the worldviews of RSS, for example, which is the most prominent organizational expression of Hindutva in modern India, if you categorize all their economic views, you will find that most of them actually align with the global left. Right? You take the right in Europe, the right wing in Europe, the West, right wing in the West. Let us take Trump, for example. He believed in building a wall between United States and South America. Whereas In the case of India, you take Narendra Modi, he was launching a satellite for digital connectivity of all the nations in the South Asian region. Right? So we are looking towards uniting people. We want all the people to come here and get united. What is the problem even with the Bangladeshi people who come inside here? The problem is they are changing the demography. It is not one of economics. It is not one of economics. They are changing the demography, which will lead to ultimately the destruction of theodiversity. That is our problem. The problem is not a human being coming and taking my resources. We are ready to share our resources. This is the only problem. Whereas in the case of United States, what is the refugee problem? There's a huge amount of land which is not even their own for a long period of history. They belong to the same Judeo-Christian culture. Yet they would stop because their own xenophobia, because of their own problem with the sharing resources. So these are the fundamental differences that we have with the right wing in the West and the pseudo left wing in India. The pseudo left wing in India ultimately aligns itself with the global right. So what we are is actually, we defy the binary of left and right, but the large, the dharmic thing, the dharmic entity kind of leans towards the global left. And it has the capacity to correct the errors in the global left. That is how I see this.
Let's talk a little bit about, how this entire worldview can position itself in the world, right? And there we began by addressing this issue, and I want to come back to this. There is the question of sovereignty. People think, or some people think that, well, the question is, if this is so open-minded, then what about, why can't Kashmir have a referendum, right? Why can't other parts of India, there's this today, there is a lot of economists and others have started talking about this North India versus South India debate. And Twitter people say, oh, well, South India is different because we are much richer and this, that, and the other, right? All of these issues, why can't these things take their natural course? And yet, there is a real impetus to protecting our sovereignty, which is important. Talk to us a little bit about balancing these two things.
See, we take the sovereignty of India. It only reinforces the larger organic cultural unity of India. The state as a machine only reinforces the larger cultural unity of India. The cultural organism of India is that. Okay. Now, when you talk about the division of North India and South India, it is a very artificial division. Okay. And people, sometimes they go to such ridiculous extent. I will give one example. There is this pop mythologist, Devadatta Patnaik. And he told that the Bharat in South India is Jain, the Bharat in North India is Brahminical. Okay. This is ridiculous. Not only it is ridiculous, it is historically wrong. We had a very great scholar called Airavata Mahadeva, who was a Dravidianist. Okay. Who was a Dravidianist. He believed that the Harappan languages were Dravidian, Proto-Dravidian, and that they had nothing to do with the Indo-Aryan or Indo-European, and he believed that Indo-European people came at one particular time, and significantly there was not much Indo-European presence in Harappa. All this was his thesis. He was such a man. And he had a very scholarly study of the Indus script, in which he came to the conclusion that the term Bharat, whose etymological root is to bear, to hold something, to be patient with something, okay, that was present already as a name of a clan in Harappan civilization. And it had its relation to Por, which is actually Por essentially means in Tamil, patience. the same meaning. It is semantically the same meaning. Etymologically, they are related. So he says that this name already was there in some form in the Harappan civilization. And it reflects itself in the Vedic civilization. It reflects itself in the Dravidian civilization, and it has the same root. Okay, so these divisions are artificial. When you have artificial divisions, which are born out of, again, colonial subjugation and colonial distortion, then what, I think it was Ursula Le Guin who said that if you are going to look at things with a broken glass in your hand, you are not only going to have a distorted vision, but you are also going to hurt your hand. So that is what has happened actually. See, we saw this, what you just now told about this North India, South India, these great scholars telling that they are different, etc. This is false. And when you take a falsehood to its logical end, what happens? You just look at Sri Lanka. If you take an ordinary Sinhalese and an ordinary Tamil from Sri Lanka and you look at them, you cannot differentiate them. Their language are more sister languages than two different language group languages. But this idea that the Sinhalese Aryan Buddhist identity and this Tamil Dravidian identity, non-Buddhist Tamil Dravidian identity aligned both to Saivism, and then it was diverted to Christianity. So these two identities were created during the colonial period. They were taken to the logical conclusion, and what happened in 2009, we lost 50,000 Tamil lives. That is what would happen ultimately. And now the entire Sri Lanka is in a problematic, chaotic situation. That shouldn't happen. So the sovereignty of India is not artificial. It is natural. It gets reinforced by the state. And so it has to be preserved because it is the truth.
So let's segue quickly for a little while into Kashmir, and then I want to ask you another big question. A lot of people don't understand about Kashmir, that Kashmir is fundamental to India's sovereignty. You know, Kashmir was the site of Shaivism. It has been, Kashmir was part of India's civilizational imagination for a much, much longer period than Islamic Kashmir, so to speak. That is a far more recent phenomena. And there was a whole range of history, or history, should one say, in Kashmir before that. In fact, even Article 370 was part of the temporary provisions of the Indian Constitution when the Constitution was written. Now, temporary provisions, is my understanding, at best could last for 5 to 10 years. It was dragged down for about 60 years, which, frankly, is quite ridiculous. 60, 65 years, it frankly is a bit ridiculous. So, in a sense, Kashmir has gone back to where it was after the removal of Article 370.
Exactly. If you look at Kashmir, see, when we were children and when we were even in our early adolescence, we used to think that the entire Kashmir was an Islamic place, full of Muslims. We didn't know that the larger part of that particular Kashmir was Ladakh, geographically. Then there was Jammu, which was Hindu, and then there was Kashmir. And this particular Kashmir, with a small number of people, they were actually imposing their tyranny over all these places. And they were destroying the cultural diversity.
This actually is mentioned right from the time of Nehru by people like Kushak Bakula Rinpoche, the Buddhist monk who actually gave the Ladakh airport, the Leh airport is named after him, and who was India's ambassador to Mongolia for 10 years. Kushak Bakula Rinpoche actually said this, that a small bunch of people in the Kashmir Valley is imposing their will over the entire region, going back to your original point, the theodiversity of Kashmir, which was made up of a Muslim Kashmir, a large Buddhist Ladakh, and a Hindu Jammu coming together, reflecting the rest of India, yes, a theodiverse place.
Theodiversity. And see, who is protecting it? Who is giving their voice to protect it right from the beginning? It is the people whom these people love to hate as Hindutvites. But actually, it is natural that it is the Hindutva that has to start this. I remember Ekata Yatra started from our Kanyakumari. You remember 1991 when Dr. Mulli Manohar Joshi, and at that time, I think now our Prime Minister Narendra Modi ji too was here. And who gave the flag actually? The flag was given by that first Paramveer Chakra holder, Abdul Hamid's mother, I think, mother or one of the relatives, they gave the national flag, which would be hoisted later in Lal Chowk. So we emphasized this particular aspect, that this is not anti-Islamic, this is actually pro-theodiversity. And the bifurcation of Kashmir, trifurcation of Kashmir was actually suggested by Dr. Ambedkar. And he said exactly this, that our people, this is the word he used, our people are going to suffer because of this. And by our people, he meant the Hindus in Jammu and Buddhists in Ladakh, actually. So if you look at it, at each and every point, the theodiversity gets preserved by Hindutva. The unity in diversity process gets preserved by Hindutva, and it is taken to the world as a blessing, as a civilizational blessing by him. That is what is happening right now. And naturally, it is having its own reactions, negative and positive.
Million tourists went to Kashmir in last year after the removal of Article 370. I was recently in Kashmir meeting friends, and there I couldn't walk till 11 o'clock in the night. It was incredible. Outside the Dal Lake, on the banks of the Dal Lake, at 11 p.m. in the night, I couldn't walk there. A place where would be empty by dusk, which would completely be full of security forces. Today, such is the volume of tourists that one can't walk at 11 o'clock in the night on the banks of the Dal Lake. That, in a sense, has been the change in Kashmir. I want to come to another point, Arvind, which is, talk to us a little bit. If this is the worldview, one must ask, who does Hindutva see as its natural allies around the world? Because after all, a worldview must have or must consider who are their allies.
Natural allies of Hindutva are people who respect the other worldviews, not just tolerate, but respect and accept other worldviews, and who are open to change. Okay, if you take in terms of actual ideological or civilizational configurations, you take the Jews, for example. Israel becomes a natural companion of India, not because we have common enemies, but because we both are ancient people who have not imposed our worldviews on others, and who have fought a long battle of survival to preserve our worldviews. Right? So that way we have our natural companions in Israel. Secular humanists. Actually, this is a very endangered species even in the West. Real secular humanists.
Truly secular humanity.
Truly secular humanities. It was actually a surprise when I was young, when I was flirting with some Naxal ideologies. I had a tract. And it was published in Canada. Okay, it was called an Institute for Marxist-Leninist Studies, and it was published in Canada. And this was written by one Har Dayal Benz. Okay, and in that they had attacked very vehemently secular humanities. Very vehemently, they told that these people are bourgeois; they are the real enemies of revolution. So what I discovered was that every secular humanist, they have been natural, spontaneous allies of India's freedom movement, of Hindutva, of Hindu, what I would call the Hindu civilizational assertion. They wouldn't have called it openly Hindutva, the Hindu civilizational assertion, they have been companions. So this has happened in a very spontaneous, somewhere that particular relation has been kind of strained, and veils have been put before both of us. We have to remove that. And they are very strong natural allies of Hindutva. They will form.
Come to the end of this conversation, let me ask you, if you look at, as India is now the 5th largest economy in the world, it hopes to become the 3rd largest economy in the world within the conclusion of this decade. As India rises, how do you see all that you explained in this conversation come together in the worldview of India as a nation How will India sustain it? How will India propagate this? And how would it bring benefits to a rising India?
Um, it's actually the most difficult question is this, because we are right now in a very important point in our civilizational life. We are fighting our civilizational panic war because the breaking India forces have captured India's prime opposition. They want to annihilate us. I was really surprised when I saw Rahul Gandhi. Now I am not talking in terms of politics. I saw Rahul Gandhi requesting the team of Bharat Jodo Yatra, requesting Kancha Ilaya to come and join Rahul Gandhi. And who's this Kancha Ilaya? I have gone through his works. The work of Kancha Ilaya, one work I studied, I can never forget, is Post-Hindu India, a book called Post-Hindu India. It was published in 2009 by Sage Publication. Okay. So first he says that the Brahmanical culture is the mother of all parasitic cultures. It is a culture of parasitism. That is the first statement that he makes. Okay, it's a cultural statement that Brahmanical culture is a parasitic culture. After a few pages, he says that the Brahmins, even from the childhood, are having a kind of a subhuman psychology. They have the psychology of animals. They don't have the psychology of fully evolved human beings. After some lines and paragraphs, he says, genetically, these people are like this. So, see, this is something that you would expect in a Nazi tract against the Jews. And this was written in 2009 and it was published by a publication like Sage. You can imagine the amount of hatred that is there to destroy this civilization. But see, this Brahmanical hatred is only a mask. Behind it, there is a genocidal hatred towards the entire Hindus. So if in Kashmir Hindus are ethnically eliminated, then it is okay because they are parasitic culture. If in 1971, the Hindus are completely killed in Bangladesh, which was the only genocide that happened here in modern times, nobody talks about it because Hindus anyway, they are parasitic culture. See, this has been normalized and he is providing an academic normalizing for the genocide of people, and he is invited by the main opposition party to participate in the Padayatra. Now you understand that they want to destroy this culture, the forces that want to destroy this culture, the monopolistic expansionist forces, they have captured the principal opposition. In other words, the entire civilizational life that has been here for more than 5,000 years now depends on a single electoral victory. If this is the situation, then we are in a very, very, very dangerous place. Nevertheless, the positive point is this government is creating a space for this civilization to take off. That is what it is doing. All the work that Modi is doing, completely, this government is doing, the infrastructures, the technological achievements. Recently, I read this book by Mustafa Sulaiman called Coming Wave. In that, he has given a paragraph about Atmanirbhar program of Modi in the context of global AI. The context of global AI, he is talking about the Atmanirbhar program of Modi. That is the point where we have come to actually. And all this is nothing but the base for the civilizational takeoff. If we get defeated civilizationally, this base will crumble. On its own, it will crumble. So, on the one hand, we are right now, we are a Schrodinger's civilization, we can say, like Schrodinger's cat. We are the Schrodinger civilization. We can become a Viswaguru, or we can become an extinct people, extinct civilization. It is up to us. Right now, that is the point where we are stuck.
Some people, again, let me play devil's advocate in conclusion. Some people would say, well, there are a billion Hindus in the world. Should is it really correct to say that they will be extinguished in a sense or exterminated? Because after all, the numbers are so large. How do you put this in context?
Hindolji, this particular scenario of post-Hindu India and what kind of a loss it will be to the entire planet has been portrayed by, again, one of my favorite science fiction authors, Ursula Le Guin, in her novel called The Telling. Please go through that novel. She shows how a monotheistic culture can dominate India and destroy it. She takes the example of India and shows how the Indian culture gets destroyed and how that becomes a loss, a reversible loss for the entire planet. It's a very touching novel, actually. And it is a lesson for all of us. And he tells that for more than 3,000 years or 4,000 years, Taoism was there in China. Today, within 30 years, Mao was able to destroy entire Tao region. In 10 years of UPA rule, a lot of structures have been created that portray stereotype Hinduism, Hindu Dharma as something evil and negative, and the entire generation of English educated people have bought it. Okay, so this is not a scenario. And again, I will tell you, we have become extinct in Pakistan. We are becoming extinct in a very humiliating way in Bangladesh. We have become extinct in Afghanistan. And right now, where in Kanyakumari district, where I live, we almost live a dhimmi existence here with Christian persecution that is happening around us. So this is a very, very plausible scenario of Hindus becoming extinct. Billion Hindus doesn't matter. More the number, more severe will be the human tragedy, actually, when it comes. So
this Mao example is very interesting. I think a lot of people ask the question that you're right. I mean, for thousands of years, Taoism, dominated the spiritual and the cultural life of China. And, within 3 to 4 decades, Mao was able to, with one cultural revolution, wipe out everything. And the Chinese Communist Party continues that process. This is a very important point. On that not very positive note, but at least hopeful note, Arvind, we will leave it at that. Thanks very much for giving us a perspective of how you see this. Let me though ask you one final question, which is, what is the silver lining? What is going right, and why do you think the worldview of Hindutva might yet thrive in the world?
the positive things that are going for Hindutva are the worldview that the science is revealing. So, for example, you take biology, you find that some of the very basic definitions of life, they resonate with the Hindu Darshana. It is not that, let us put the caveat very clearly, not that we have already known this. No, we didn't know that. Point is, the worldview that it reveals, it resonates with the worldview that this has. So naturally, when people want to take it from the human heritage, then they will be coming to the Hindu Darshanas. So that is one positive thing. The second positive thing is that in 2024, if Modi comes back, and when Modi comes back, let us put it that way, when Modi comes back, we will be able to do more churning of this kind. And we will be able to crystallize this thing. See, again and again, I will tell this. Modi is creating a space for us to churn and space for us to make sure that we get the Amrita coming out of the churn. Of course, there will be also this Alakala Visha also will be coming out in the form of obscurantism, if you know what I mean, actually. So, but nevertheless, this Amrita, if we are able to get it in this buffer time, then the Hindu civilization will thrive and it will be a blessing, and it will make sure that every native culture, which is today reduced to the point of extinction, can come back again. It will be able to do
That very positive note. Thank you very much, Arvind, for joining us. I really appreciate your time. Once again, you've written this elaborate and very, very detailed book on Hindutva, its origins and its thoughts. I don't think before you anybody has done such a seminal work. I congratulate you for it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much for those kind words. Thank you. It is really a pleasure talking to you.
Pleasure. Thank
Thank
you so much.